When my daughter-in-law printed the family tree for the grandkids' school project, I smiled until I realized my entire side of the family wasn't even on it. It was a bright Sunday morning in Plano, Texas. I'd driven over to my son Darren's house for our usual Sunday brunch. Amanda had made her famous cinnamon rolls, and the kids, Lily and Josh, were bouncing with excitement. As soon as I walked in, Lily ran up to me, holding a big poster board covered in colorful paper leaves and markers. "Grandma, look, this is our family tree. It's for school," she said, her little face glowing. I took the board from her hands and smiled. It was beautiful, carefully drawn branches, names written in neat handwriting, little pictures of people glued beside them. Amanda stood behind her, proud and beaming. But as I looked closer, my smile started to fade. Every name, every single one, belonged to Amanda's side of the family. Her parents, her grandparents, her cousins. I kept looking, thinking maybe I'd missed something. I turned the board around, checked the bottom corners, even lifted a few paper leaves just to be sure. No burns. No mention of my husband, Tom. No mention of me. Not even my parents, who'd raised Darren and loved those kids like their own when they were alive. It was like someone had quietly cut off half the tree and pretended it never existed. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there with that fake smile people where, when their heart sinks a little. Amanda said, "The kids worked so hard on it. Isn't it adorable?" "It's lovely," I said softly. "It really is." Darren poured me some coffee and started talking about the Cowboys game. And I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. Lily went on explaining who was who. "That's Grandma Penny and Grandpa Joe. And this is my great-grandma Ruth. All from Amanda's side." I asked gently, "Where are the burns?" Amanda paused, caught off guard. "Oh, well," she said, brushing her hair back. "The teacher said we didn't have to include everyone. There wasn't enough room, so we just picked one side. It was easier." I nodded, pretending to understand. "One side," I repeated quietly. Darren didn't look up. He was spreading butter on his toast, pretending he didn't hear. "It's okay," I said after a moment, even though it wasn't. "It's just a school project." But as I sipped my coffee, something inside me felt heavy. That poster sat on the kitchen counter the rest of the morning. Every time I glanced at it, the bright colors and happy little leaves seemed to shout what was missing. It wasn't about space or paper. It was about being forgotten. I watched my grandchildren laugh, eat their pancakes, and chatter about who looked most like whom. I used to be part of those talks. "You have Grandma's eyes. You laugh like Grandpa Tom." But that morning, I realized they might grow up without even knowing where those eyes came from. When Amanda asked Lily to show the tree again for a photo, I stood behind them, smiling for the picture, pretending not to notice my name was nowhere on that board. Later, as I helped Amanda clear the dishes, I tried to sound light. "It's such a lovely project," I said. "I bet the teacher will love it." She smiled, too busy wiping the counter to see my face. "Oh, I hope so." The kids really took pride in it. I wanted to ask her why she hadn't included me, why my husband's name wasn't there. But I didn't. I was raised to pick my battles. My mother used to say, "Sometimes silence is louder than words." Still, as I drove home, that silence hurt. The road back to my little house felt longer than usual. The radio played an old country song about family and roots, and I had to switch it off. I caught myself whispering, "Roots, huh?" and shaking my head. When I got home, I made a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, too quiet. The same table where my husband and I once talked about how proud we were of Darren. I remember Tom saying, "He's got a good head on his shoulders. He'll keep the family together." I stared out the window, watching the neighbor's oak tree sway in the wind. I'd planted my own magnolia tree, when Darren was born. It's grown tall now, strong and full. It still blooms every spring. I smiled thinking about that. Then I thought about the family tree again, the one hanging in Darren's kitchen, and how half of it had been chopped away without a thought. It's strange how something so small can sting so deeply. It wasn't just about names on paper. It was about being seen, remembered, and passed on. It was about telling the kids that their stories started long before Amanda's fancy poster board. When I was a girl, my mama used to keep a wooden box under her bed filled with old photos and letters. She called it her story box. Every few months, she'd take it out and tell me where I came from, who built our porch, who fought in the war, who made it through the Dust Bowl with just a prayer and a loaf of bread. I realized that day how easy it is for those stories to disappear, one missing name at a time. That night, I took out my own box, an old tin one that used to hold sewing supplies. Inside were photos, Tom's dog tags, my parents' wedding picture, and a few newspaper clippings from when Darren made the high school honor roll. I hadn't looked through them in years. As I flipped through each photo, I felt that ache ease just a little. My life, our family, was real, whether it fit on Amanda's board or not. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been taken from me. Not in a loud, dramatic way. Quietly, softly, like being erased in pencil, one small stroke at a time. When I went to bed that night, I thought about Lily's face, so proud of her project. And I whispered to myself, it was like I never existed. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to stay erased. That night after the family tree incident, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about what it meant to be left off something that's supposed to show where we all come from. It's a strange kind of pain, quiet but deep. I laid there and realized maybe it was time to remember who we really were before anyone else decided to forget. I grew up in Abilene, back when the summers felt endless and everybody knew who owned which store downtown. My parents, Jack and Louise Harper, ran a small hardware store right off South First Street, the kind of place where a customer could walk in needing one screw, and my daddy would hand it to them with a smile and say, "Just bring me the nickel next time." People trusted him because he trusted them first. Mama kept the books and knew every family in town. She had this way of remembering details, who just had a new baby, who was struggling, who'd lost a job. She'd sneak extra nails or a hammer into their bag. And when Daddy caught her, she'd just wink and say, "God keeps track, not the cash register." That's the home I came from. Honest work, small kindnesses, people who believed in showing up. I think about them often, especially now that so much of life seems rushed. When I married Tom Burns, we built a life that looked a lot like theirs. He came from a long line of teachers and farmers over in Waco. His father taught high school science for 35 years, and his mother ran a small vegetable garden that could have fed half the county. Tom used to say she measured time by what was growing in the soil: tomatoes, corn, green beans. Tom was steady, dependable, the kind of man who fixed things before you asked. He served in the Army during the last years of the Korean conflict, and when he came back, he used his GI Bill to finish college. I can still see him standing in our backyard, teaching Darren how to hold a fishing pole, the two of them laughing like the world was perfect. We raised Darren to know where he came from. He used to help me in the kitchen when he was little. I taught him my mama's biscuit recipe: cold butter, self-rising flour, and a gentle hand. When he got older, I'd tell him stories about his great-grandfather Jack, who kept that hardware store running even through the oil crisis. I'd say, "That's who you come from, son. Hard work and backbone." He'd smile, roll his eyes, and say, "I know, Mom." After Tom passed, I tried to keep the memories alive for the grandkids. Every summer, I'd have them over for grandma camp. We'd bake, plant tomatoes, and go through old photo albums. They loved hearing about Grandpa Tom's army stories, how he once fixed a radio with a piece of gum wrapper, or how he sent love letters home every week without fail. Lily used to giggle and say, "That's so old-fashioned, Grandma." But she loved those letters. I'd tell them about the time my daddy built a birdhouse with nothing but scrap wood and patience, or how my mama once saved a family of kittens from a rainstorm and kept them warm in the hardware store's storeroom. Those weren't big stories, but they were the kind that teach you what kind of people you come from. But sitting there that night, thinking about that school project, I realized something that chilled me. None of that would exist if no one remembered it. Stories die quietly when they stop being told. My parents never had fancy degrees or big vacations. Their legacy was in the people they helped and the lessons they passed down. They taught me that family isn't just blood, it's memory. It's what we keep alive by saying their names. When I was a young woman, I never thought much about legacy. You're too busy working, raising kids, paying bills. You think family will always know who they are. But time moves fast. Generations grow apart. I looked around my living room. The framed pictures, the worn Bible on the coffee table, Tom's service flag in its wooden case. Everything that made up our story was right there. And yet, somehow, it had been left out of the next chapter. That hurt more than I expected. Not because Amanda meant harm. I don't believe she did. But because she didn't think about it. That's the part that stung. When someone forgets you on purpose, at least you know they saw you first. But when they forget you by accident, it means you were never really part of the picture to begin with. I picked up the photo of my parents on their wedding day. Mama had on a simple lace dress, and Daddy looked so proud you'd think he'd won the lottery. Behind them stood their parents, the great-grandparents my grandkids didn't even know existed. That photo had been in our family for 70 years. And yet, in one colorful poster, they'd been erased. I thought about what Tom would have said. Probably something steady like, "Don't make a fuss, Sue. They'll learn." But I knew this wasn't about fussing. It was about making sure our story didn't vanish in a cloud of convenience. The next morning, I walked out to the backyard. The magnolia tree I'd planted when Darren was born was full of white blossoms. I stood there a while, just breathing, and I realized that tree was the best symbol of all, planted decades ago, still growing strong. Its roots went deep, and it had weathered every storm. I ran my hand along the bark and thought, this is what family is supposed to be. It doesn't matter who forgets you on paper if your roots are strong. I decided then that I would find a way to remind my grandkids who they were, not with speeches or guilt, but with truth. I wanted them to know about the people who came before them, the ones who worked, prayed, and loved so they could be here. Because one thing I know for sure, a family isn't complete until every name is spoken. As I headed back inside, I looked once more at that old magnolia tree standing tall against the Texas sky. The thought came to me plain and clear, like something my mama might have whispered in my ear. A tree without roots falls at the first storm. And right then, I promised myself my family would remember their roots, whether anyone else wrote them down or not. The next Sunday, I decided to bring it up. Not in a confrontational way, just a question. I told myself it wasn't about starting trouble. I only wanted to understand. When I arrived at Darren and Amanda's house, the smell of bacon and waffles filled the air. The kids were still in their pajamas, watching cartoons. Everything looked so normal that I almost changed my mind. But the thought of that family tree kept tugging at me. After breakfast, while Darren was rinsing plates and the kids were running in and out of the kitchen, I turned to Amanda. "Amanda," I said, keeping my voice soft, "I've been thinking about the family tree Lily made for school. It was beautiful. I just wondered why none of the Burns or my parents were on it." She looked up from the dishwasher, her hands still wet, and gave a small laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, that. The teacher said the kids only needed to show one side for space. It wasn't personal, Susan. Just easier that way. Just one side. I repeated. Yeah, she said quickly, turning back to stack dishes. It's no big deal. I smiled and nodded like it made perfect sense. No big deal, I said under my breath. Darren walked back into the kitchen, then, phone in hand, scrolling through something. I looked at him, hoping he might say something, but he didn't even glance up. I wanted to tell him that family isn't about convenience or space on a poster. It's about the people who built the road he's walking on. But the words never came out. Instead, I said, well, it was a lovely project. Lily's a talented little artist. Amanda smiled, relieved the subject had passed. She really enjoyed it, she said, wiping her hands. Maybe next year they'll do something bigger, and we can include everyone. She said it like a favor, like maybe someday my side would earn its place. The room felt suddenly too bright, like someone had turned on all the lights at once. I looked at the kids playing with their Legos on the floor and thought about how they'd grow up believing half their story didn't matter. Darren still hadn't said a word. I could see his reflection in the kitchen window, thumb tapping on that screen, his mind somewhere else. So I changed the subject. Do you want me to take the kids next weekend? I was thinking we could bake some cookies. Amanda smiled again, this time more naturally. That would be great. Darren's parents' weekend at work is coming up, and I've got a volunteer thing at the school. Perfect, I said, my voice steady. I'll pick them up Saturday morning. We spent the rest of the morning talking about safe topics, school lunches, weather, gas prices. I laughed when I needed to, but my mind stayed somewhere else. On the drive home, I replayed the conversation over and over. The laughter, the no big deal, the silence from my own son. It was all too polite, too tidy, like a conversation you'd have with a stranger instead of family. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment before turning off the engine. I looked at the old magnolia tree again. Its roots were deep, but the branches stretched wide. I wondered what it would be like if someone decided to cut off half of it and pretend it never existed. That image sat heavy in my chest. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the framed pictures on the wall. There was one of Darren at his college graduation, one of Tom and me on our 30th anniversary trip to Galveston, and one of all of us together the year Lily was born. Everyone was smiling in that picture. I couldn't help but wonder where that version of us had gone. It wasn't just about the poster anymore. It was about something deeper, a slow fading of connection. Like I'd become a visitor in my own family, a polite guest who brings dessert and smiles on cue. But I also knew I couldn't force respect. It doesn't work that way. You can't beg people to see your worth. They either do or they don't. Still, I couldn't shake the disappointment. My parents had worked their whole lives so that I could have better. Tom had given years of service to this country and then built a life for us from scratch. And now his name was nowhere. That night, I called my old friend Nancy. We've known each other since high school. I told her what happened, and she just sighed. People forget too easily these days, she said. They think history starts when they show up. She wasn't wrong. We talked for a bit. Then I said goodnight and sat in the quiet again. I could have called Darren, could have told him how hurt I felt, but I didn't. I didn't want to sound like another mother who couldn't let go. I raised him to be his own man, and I respected that. Still, part of me wondered when being his own man started meaning forgetting where he came from. That night, I prayed like I always do. I asked for peace, not answers. I told God I didn't want to be angry. I just wanted to feel seen again. I fell asleep thinking about my parents, their hardware store, and how they would have laughed if they'd heard the phrase, "not enough space for everyone," because in their world, there was always space for family. The next morning, I woke up with a new kind of calm. Not the easy kind, but the kind that comes when something inside you quietly clicks. I realized I didn't need to argue or explain myself to anyone. If they couldn't see my side of the tree, I would just have to show them what it really looked like. Something small shifted in me that day. Not anger, not bitterness, just a quiet decision. And once a woman my age makes a decision, it usually sticks. A week passed after that quiet Sunday talk, and I still couldn't shake it. Every time I looked at the framed pictures around my house, I felt that same tug, like my family's story was sitting there waiting to be told, but no one was listening. One Saturday morning, I decided to clean the attic. I hadn't been up there in years, not since Tom passed. It was mostly boxes I'd promised myself I'd go through one day. Well, that day finally came. The air up there smelled like dust and cedar. Sunlight peeked through the small window, catching bits of dust that floated like tiny memories. I started moving boxes around, Christmas decorations, old school books, and stacks of photo albums. Then, tucked in the corner under an old quilt, I saw the cedar chest. It was the one my parents gave Tom and me as a wedding gift. I hadn't opened it in a long time, but I knew what was inside before I even lifted the lid. The hinges creaked a little as I pushed it open. Right on top were letters tied together with a faded blue ribbon, the ones Tom sent me while he was stationed overseas. The paper was yellowed, but his handwriting was still the same strong slant I remembered. I held one up and smiled when I read the first line. "Sue, I hope you're watering the tomatoes better than last year." He always started with a joke. Under the letters were photo albums, thick with black and white pictures. My parents, my grandparents, my cousins back in Abilene. There was even a picture of my great-grandmother on my mother's side, a small woman with sharp eyes and a scarf tied around her head. She came to Texas from Ireland when she was 16. I found her old immigration papers, too, folded neatly in an envelope. She couldn't read or write back then, but she built a life from nothing. I sat there for hours, cross-legged on the floor, looking through those photos. Each one felt like a piece of a puzzle that had been sitting in this box, waiting for someone to remember where it fit. There was one of my daddies standing in front of the hardware store, his sleeves rolled up, smiling like he owned the world. Another of my mama holding me as a baby, both of us squinting into the sun. I even found Tom's Army medals still pinned to the cloth backing I made for them years ago. As I touched each piece, I remembered the stories behind them. How Daddy used to open the store early for the old ranchers, so they could grab supplies before the heat hit. How Mama would bring soup to the neighbors during flu season. How Tom stayed up all night fixing the washing machine because he didn't want me lifting heavy clothes to the laundromat. Every memory was a reminder of who we were, people who worked hard, loved deeply, and stood by each other. And it hit me then, my grandchildren didn't know any of this. They didn't know about their great-great-grandmother who crossed an ocean, or the man who built a store with his bare hands, or the soldier who wrote love letters from halfway around the world. I realized that box wasn't just full of keepsakes. It was full of proof. Proof that my family existed, that we mattered, that we had roots deeper than any school project could hold. I sat there staring at the chest, and something clicked in me. I wasn't angry anymore, just determined. If Amanda's version of the family tree didn't have room for us, then I'd make my own, not to argue or shame anyone, but to show my grandkids the truth of where they came from. I wanted them to see faces, names, and stories, to know that they come from strong, imperfect, real people. People who didn't have much, but gave what they could. People who built a life with calloused hands and honest hearts. I took out a notebook from the shelf beside the attic wall and started jotting names. My parents, their parents, my cousins, Tom's folks, his grandparents, everyone I could remember. Then I went through the photos and started labeling the backs in pencil, just like Mama used to do. For the first time in a while, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't invisible up here. Every face I touched felt like someone reaching back to say, "We're still here, Susan." I found an old box of colored pencils from when Lily used to draw at my house. I started sketching a rough outline of a tree on a piece of cardboard, just to see how it might look. Before I knew it, an hour had passed, and I had the beginnings of something that looked like a map of love, not just names. I smiled, thinking about how my grandkids' eyes might light up when they saw it. Maybe they'd laugh at the old hairstyles or the black and white photos. Maybe they'd ask questions. Maybe they'd finally know that half their story didn't start in some other city, but right here in Texas soil. The attic was getting warm, but I didn't want to leave. I took one last look inside the chest, then closed it gently. It wasn't just a box anymore. It was a reminder that history isn't made by the people who write it down. It's made by the people who live it. When I came back downstairs, I brewed some tea and sat at the kitchen table with the notebook and photos spread out in front of me. The house felt alive again, like the walls were humming with the voices of everyone who came before me. I thought about the kids, about that bright poster board hanging in their kitchen. Maybe one day, when they're older, they'll look at my version and understand why it mattered so much. That evening, I called my neighbor Ruth, she's good with crafts, and asked if she had any old poster boards or scrapbook supplies I could borrow. She laughed and said, "You starting a project?" Something like that. I told her. A little history lesson. After we hung up, I sat there in the quiet and looked at the notes I'd written. Every name, every story, every little connection, all of it was part of me. I felt lighter somehow, not because anything had changed yet, but because I finally knew what I was going to do about it. If they wouldn't show my side, I'd show it myself. By the following weekend, I had everything ready. The dining table was covered with photos, paper cutouts, and bits of ribbon. I'd spent 3 evenings laying out names and pictures, checking dates, and making sure every story I told would be something the kids could understand. I didn't want it to look perfect. I wanted it to look real. The kind of thing made by hand, with love, not by a printer. That Saturday morning, I called Amanda and told her I wanted to take Lily and Josh for the afternoon. Just for a few hours. I said, "We'll bake cookies." She agreed easily, and by 10 o'clock, the kids were at my door with their backpacks and big smiles. "Grandma, what are we baking today?" Lily asked as she skipped into the kitchen. "Sugar cookies," I said, "but first, I have a little surprise for you both." They followed me into the living room, where the large sheet of craft paper was laid out across the coffee table. Their eyes widened when they saw it. "What's that?" Josh asked. "This," I said, smiling, "is our family tree, the one with all the branches." They leaned in, curious. The tree stretched across the paper, drawn in brown pencil and colored in green. Every branch held small black and white photos, each one labeled neatly. I'd tied tiny red ribbons between generations, so the lines looked like they were connected by heartstrings. Lily pointed to a photo near the bottom. "Who's that?" "That's your great-great-grandmother, Margaret," I said. "She came all the way from Ireland when she was 16. Didn't speak a word of English, but she found work sewing clothes. Every penny she earned, she sent home." The kids' eyes got big. "All the way from Ireland?" Josh asked. "Like on a boat?" "That's right," I said. "A long boat ride. And she didn't know a single soul when she landed. But she made it." Next, I pointed to another photo, my father standing outside the hardware store. "This was your great-grandpa, Jack. During a big flood in Abilene, he opened the store and gave people tools and sandbags for free so they could protect their homes. He said, You can't put a price on helping your neighbor. Lily smiled softly. That's nice. I nodded. He didn't have much, but he believed that kindness always comes back around. I moved my hand to a picture of my mother in her church choir robe. And this is your great-grandma Louise. She used to sing every Sunday, even when her voice was tired. She said music was how she prayed. Josh looked at me. Did she sing good? I laughed. Not always, but she sang loud, and that's what counts. We all laughed then, and the room felt warm, not from the Texas heat, but from something deeper. Then I showed them a photo of Tom in uniform. And this is your grandpa, Tom. He served in the army. When he was overseas, he used to write me letters every week. One time, his radio broke, and he fixed it with a gum wrapper and a bit of wire. He always said, "There's no problem a little patience can't solve." Lily tilted her head. Did he ever get scared? I looked at the picture and said, everyone gets scared sometimes. But brave people do what's right even when they're scared. For a long moment, the kids didn't say anything. They just looked at the photos, touching the corners carefully, asking who was related to who. Josh pointed at one more picture. Who's that? That's me, I said, laughing. That's me when I was your age. We didn't have iPads back then, so I played outside until dark. They giggled, and I felt my heart lighten. We spent the rest of the afternoon baking cookies and talking about the people in those pictures. I told them about how my dad once taught me to fix a broken drawer with nothing but a piece of string, and how their grandpa Tom loved to whistle when he worked. When the cookies were cooling, Lily picked up one of the photos again. Grandma, she said softly, can I take a picture of this tree on my tablet? I want to show my teacher. I blinked, surprised. Of course you can, sweetheart. She carefully snapped a picture, making sure to get the whole page in the frame. Then Josh took one too. That small moment felt like a victory, not the loud kind, but the kind that fills you with quiet pride. They wanted to remember. That was enough. When the doorbell rang, I knew Darren and Amanda had arrived. The kids ran to the door, excited to tell them about the cookies and the surprise. Amanda stepped in first, looking neat and polished, her sunglasses perched on top of her head. Darren followed, smiling at the smell of sugar cookies. Hey, Mom, he said, giving me a quick hug. Smells amazing in here. Lily tugged at Amanda's sleeve. Mom, Grandma made us our family tree. With everyone. Amanda blinked, clearly caught off guard. Oh. Before she could say anything else, Lily grabbed her hand and pulled her into the living room. The big sheet was still spread out on the table, surrounded by photos and ribbon. Amanda stood there staring at it. Darren came up behind her, looking curious. This is beautiful, he said, his voice soft. Amanda folded her arms. That's sweet, Susan. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried that polite edge that says more than words do. I thought the kids might like to see where the other half of their story came from. I said evenly. Lily was still pointing at the photos, explaining proudly who everyone was. This is Grandma's daddy, and this is Grandpa Tom. Amanda gave a small smile. That's nice, honey. We should get going, though. Grandma's probably tired. I smiled back. I'm fine. They were wonderful company. As they gathered their things, Lily leaned in and hugged me tight. Thanks for showing us, Grandma. I didn't know we had so many people in our family. I hugged her back. We've got plenty of branches. Sweetheart, you just have to know where to look. They left soon after, the sound of their car fading down the street. I walked back into the living room and looked at the handmade tree still spread out on the table. The sunlight hit the photos just right, making them glow. It wasn't perfect. Some pictures were crooked, some names written in my shaky handwriting, but it was honest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my family was visible again. not because someone gave me permission, but because I took the time to show it. And deep down, I knew that even if Amanda didn't see the point, the kids did. And that was all that mattered. A few days after the kids' visit, the phone rang just as I was folding laundry. It was Darren. His voice sounded calm, but careful, the kind of tone people use when they're walking on thin ice. "Hey, Mom," he started. "I wanted to talk to you about the family tree thing you did with the kids." I smiled, thinking maybe the kids had shown their teacher or that Amanda had come around. "Oh, did they tell you about it? They seemed to really enjoy it." He cleared his throat. "Yeah, they did. They were excited, but Amanda thought maybe it was a little confusing for them." "Confusing?" I repeated. "Well, he said slowly, they already turned in the project for school. Amanda just felt like maybe showing them something different made things harder to explain." I felt my stomach tighten. Harder to explain? I just told them about their other grandparents. Darren, the ones they never got to meet. "I know," he said quickly, "and it's fine, really. Amanda just didn't want the kids mixed up." Mixed up. That's the phrase that stuck with me. Like my family, my parents, my husband were a complication instead of part of who they were. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I said quietly, I just wanted them to know where they come from. "I know, Mom. It's okay," he said, his voice gentle but tired. "Let's just keep things simple for the kids, all right?" "Simple," I repeated, though it came out more as a whisper. "All right." We talked for another minute or two about the weather, about his work, and then he said he had to run. I hung up and sat there staring at the phone, the laundry forgotten on the couch. For a long while, I just sat in the quiet. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something smaller and heavier, like disappointment that settled deep in the chest and refused to move. It wasn't about the project anymore. It was about respect, about being seen. I'd done everything right. I'd raised my boy, supported his marriage, loved those grandkids with all my heart, and yet, somehow, I'd become someone whose history needed to be kept simple. I could have called him back and defended myself. I could have told him that his kids weren't confused. They were proud. But what would that change? I'd be the overbearing mother again, the one who takes things too seriously. So instead, I took a deep breath and decided to let it go, not out of weakness, but out of strength. Some things don't need a fight. They just need time to show their truth. That evening, I made a cup of tea and opened my laptop. I searched genealogy groups near me. To my surprise, a local community center just 10 minutes away had a club that met every Wednesday morning. It said, "Bring your photos and stories. Let's preserve them together." That sounded like exactly what I needed. The next week, I drove over and joined. The group was mostly women around my age, each with their own boxes of old photos and worn family Bibles. We spent hours sharing stories about ancestors who came through Ellis Island, great-grandfathers who worked on railroads, mothers who sewed every dress their daughters wore. It was comforting, being in a room full of people who still cared about where they came from. No one said too much information or confusing. They listened. They nodded. They remembered. One lady named Carol helped me start digitizing my photos. "You can scan them here," she said, showing me the big flatbed machine. That way, they'll never get lost. For the next few weeks, that became my routine. Every Wednesday, I'd bring a new stack, pictures of my parents, Tom's service records, and even my great-grandmother's old papers. I learned how to organize them by decade, how to label and store them online. It felt good, like I was rebuilding something that had almost disappeared. One afternoon, Carol asked, "Why did you start doing all this, Susan?" I smiled, because someone forgot to include me in a story that belonged to me too. She nodded. "That's the best reason there is." At home, I created folders for each generation. I typed short notes about who people were and what made them special. I even made a digital copy of my handmade tree, crooked pictures, and all. The more I worked on it, the lighter I felt. I realized this wasn't just about Amanda or Darren anymore. This was about me, and about all the women before me who had worked too hard to be erased by convenience. Once, I caught myself laughing out loud while typing a memory about my daddy and his hammer that never broke. It felt like he was sitting right there beside me again. A few weeks later, Lily called me out of the blue. "Grandma, guess what? My teacher said we can bring more family pictures if we want. Can I show her the one of Grandpa Tom?" My heart swelled. "Of course you can, sweetheart. I'll text it to your mom." When I hung up, I felt that quiet satisfaction again, not because I'd proved anyone wrong, but because the truth had found its own way out. That evening, I sent Darren a short text. "Tell Lily I'm proud of her." He replied with a heart emoji and nothing else. It was small, but it was enough for now. After dinner, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the sun dip behind the magnolia tree. Its branches swayed in the warm air, steady and unbothered. I thought about everything: the missing names, the phone call, the quiet spaces between us. And I realized something. Silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means you've said all that needed saying. That night, before going to bed, I printed a few of the digitized photos and placed them in a small album. On the first page, I wrote a single line in neat cursive for Lily and Josh, so you'll always know who you came from. Then I placed it on the shelf beside my wedding photo. I didn't know when they'd see it or if they ever would, but I knew one thing for certain: my story, our story, wasn't going anywhere. Because truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs someone willing to remember. And I decided that someone was going to be me. 2 weeks passed quietly. The house felt peaceful again. I spent my mornings watering the flowers and checking the mail, my afternoons at the genealogy club. I didn't expect anything to come from all that work I'd done. I was content knowing the truth was safely tucked away. Then, one Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Darren. "Mom, the kids have Heritage Day at school next week. They want you to come if you can." I read it twice to make sure I hadn't imagined it. The grandkids were inviting me. I smiled, typed back, I wouldn't miss it for the world. The next Friday, I drove over to the elementary school. The parking lot was full: minivans, SUVs, and parents carrying posters and snacks. The sign near the entrance read, "Heritage Day Fair." The hallway smelled like crayons and coffee. When I walked into the gym, my heart almost stopped. Along the walls were rows of colorful displays: flags, maps, photos, and drawings. Kids were proudly showing off where they came from. I spotted Lily and Josh near the middle, standing by their poster. And there it was, the same family tree from a few weeks ago, but now it was different. 2 sets of branches stretched out across the page. One side had Amanda's family names and photos, just like before. The other side, my side, had been added. My parents, Tom, his parents, even my great-grandmother's photo. The handwriting was messy, but every name was there. I felt my throat tighten. Lily saw me first and waved so hard her bracelet jingled. "Grandma, look, we fixed it." I walked over, trying not to tear up. "You sure did, sweetheart," I said, smiling. Josh pointed to the picture of Tom in uniform. "We told the class about Grandpa Tom. The teacher said he was a real hero. He was," I said softly, "he'd be proud of you both." Their teacher, Mrs. Clayton, came over then. She was a kind woman in her 40s, the kind of teacher who looks you in the eye when she speaks. "You must be Mrs. Burns," she said. "Your grandchildren told us so many wonderful stories about your family. Thank you for helping them learn about their roots." "Oh, I didn't do much," I said, just told a few stories." She smiled. "Sometimes a story is more powerful than any textbook." The kids were fascinated by your husband's letters. We talked about how family history connects us all. That's when I noticed Amanda standing near the doorway. She was holding her purse close, watching the scene quietly. Darren stood beside her, smiling proudly at the kids. I waved at them. Amanda hesitated, then walked over. "Hi, Susan," she said, her voice polite but softer than before. "Hi, Amanda," I replied. "The kids did a beautiful job." She nodded, eyes scanning the poster. "They worked hard on it. They wouldn't stop talking about those stories you told." "I'm glad," I said. "They're part of who they are." Amanda looked down for a moment, then said quietly they were proud to tell everyone about their great-granddad's medals. Something in her tone had changed. It wasn't defensive or distant. It was almost humble. She wasn't saying sorry, but she didn't need to. The moment spoke for itself. I smiled, not gloating, just content. "He'd have liked that," I said. "He always wanted them to be curious about the world." We stood there for a few seconds, watching the kids talk to their classmates. Darren joined us, grinning. "Looks like our family's famous now," he joked. I laughed. Famous might be a stretch. But I'll admit, watching my grandchildren share those stories filled me with something close to pride. Not pride in being right, but pride in being seen again. Lily's classmate asked, "Is that really your grandpa?" And she nodded, her little voice strong. "Yep. He fixed radios in the army. Grandma said he could fix anything." Hearing her say that out loud did something to me. It was as if every moment I'd felt invisible had been quietly replaced with this, a child carrying forward the truth. As the presentations wrapped up, Mrs. Clayton called a few families up to thank them for contributing local Texas family stories. When she said my name, the kids clapped and pulled me to the front. Mrs. Burns helped us understand how family history shapes who we are. The teacher said kindly, and she reminded us that every branch of the family matters. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, but I felt warmth spread through me as the other parents smiled. A few even came up afterward to say, "That was lovely," or "Your husband sounded like a good man." When it was over, I helped the kids pack up their poster. Amanda and Darren chatted with another parent, and I took a moment to just watch the two little ones. They were laughing, comparing projects, so proud of themselves. On the way out, Amanda walked beside me. "They really look up to you, Susan," she said. I smiled gently. That's all I've ever wanted. In the parking lot, Darren gave me a hug. "Thanks for coming, Mom." I think this meant a lot to them. It meant a lot to me, too, I said honestly. When I got home later, I hung my coat, poured some tea, and sat at the kitchen table. The afternoon sun came through the blinds, warm and steady. I pulled out the small album I'd made for Lily and Josh and flipped through it again. Their little faces flashed in my mind, curious, proud, happy. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace, real peace. I realized something simple that day. Sometimes you don't need to fight to be remembered. You just need to keep showing up, telling the truth, and letting it take root in the right hearts. That evening, I took the digital file of our family tree and emailed it to Amanda. I didn't add a note, just the file. A few minutes later, she replied with 2 words, "Thank you." I smiled and closed my laptop. That was enough. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed gently in the evening breeze. I thought about how strong it had grown through all those seasons, storms, drought, and sunlight. The roots had held steady. And I realized that families are the same. Some branches bend, some break, but the roots, the real roots, stay firm. I sat back, feeling grateful, not just for being included again, but for having the strength to hold on when it felt easier to let go. because sometimes love doesn't look like agreement or understanding. Sometimes it's just the quiet act of showing your truth again and again until the people you love finally see it. And that day, watching my grandkids share their story, I knew they saw it. They really did. That night after Heritage Day, I came home smiling. I set my purse on the counter and looked around my quiet house. It felt peaceful, not empty like before, just calm. The kind of quiet that lets you breathe. I made a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the small family album I'd made for Lily and Josh. The photos looked brighter, now, almost alive. It was strange. The stories hadn't changed, but something inside me had. I finally felt seen again, not because anyone said the right words, but because the truth had finally found its way to the right place. The next morning, I decided to do something I'd been meaning to do for weeks. I went to the craft store and bought a large frame. It was simple but sturdy, dark wood with a thin gold trim. Nothing fancy, but it felt right. When I got home, I cleared space on the wall in my hallway, just beside the wedding photo of Tom and me. I took my handmade family tree, the one I'd built with old photos, ribbon, and love, and gently slid it into the frame. As I lifted it onto the wall, I could almost hear Tom's voice saying, "Looks good, Sue. You've still got the touch." I stepped back and looked at it. There it was, every face, every name, every branch that made us who we are. My parents, his parents, grandparents, cousins, even the little ones who came after. Some smiling, some serious, all part of the same story. I thought about how close those memories had come to being lost. One forgotten name at a time, one polite silence after another. But not anymore. That tree wasn't just paper and photos. It was proof. Proof that families don't vanish because someone forgets to write them down. They live on through stories, through moments shared at kitchen tables, through the way grandkids smile with their grandfather's eyes. A few days later, I got a call from Amanda. Her tone was different, softer than I'd ever heard. "Susan," she said, "I wanted to thank you again for coming to Heritage Day. The kids can't stop talking about it. Josh even asked if we could hang your family tree photo in their playroom." I laughed. "You tell him Grandma's honored." We chatted a little while longer. For the first time, it felt easy between us. No tension, no polite walls. Just two women who loved the same people and were trying to do right by them. After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched the sun hit the magnolia tree outside. The same one I'd planted the year Darren was born. It had grown so tall now that its branches stretched past the roofline. Every spring, without fail, it bloomed, no matter how harsh the winter had been. That tree reminded me of life itself. Families bend, they change, they lose a few leaves, but the roots always hold on. A few days later, Lily sent me a picture on my phone. She'd drawn a smaller version of the family tree herself, complete with hearts and stick figures. Underneath it, she'd written, "My family, all of it." I must have looked at that photo 10 times before setting my phone down. That simple drawing said more than any apology ever could. It made me think about how easy it is for people my age to feel forgotten. Sometimes our stories get brushed aside like old newspapers. The world moves fast, and people think the past is just something behind them. But it's not. It's underneath them, holding everything up. I decided to start writing down more memories, just small things. How Tom used to hum when he worked in the garage. How my mama would whistle while hanging laundry. How my daddy always smelled like sawdust and soap. Those little details might seem ordinary, but they're what make a family real. One afternoon, as I was writing, I thought about all the people who might feel the same way I once did. Invisible, like their story didn't matter anymore. And I wished I could tell each of them what I'd learned. So if you're listening to this, and you've ever felt forgotten, I want to tell you something from my heart. You're still here. Your story still matters. Maybe someone left you out of their picture. Maybe your name wasn't mentioned. Maybe your kindness went unnoticed. But that doesn't erase who you are or what you've done. The world needs your story, even if it's told one grandchild, one friend, or one piece of paper at a time. Because a family tree isn't about being perfect. It's about remembering. It's about love that stretches beyond generations, even when people forget for a while. When I finished writing that day, I looked up at the framed tree on my wall. I ran my fingers along the edge of the frame and whispered, "We're all here." And that felt good, really good. Now, when Lily and Josh visit, they always ask to see the wall of stories. They'll stand there and point, laughing at old hairstyles or asking who everyone was. Sometimes Amanda joins in too, adding a story or two from her side. The wall keeps growing, not with new pictures, but with shared understanding. That's when it hit me. Families don't stay whole because we never disagree. They stay whole because someone keeps telling the stories that hold them together. I've learned that you can't control who remembers you, but you can make sure your story is worth remembering. And that's what I plan to keep doing. So now, as I close this story, I want to say something to everyone listening. Maybe you've been erased from someone's story too. Maybe your name got left off a list, or your picture wasn't on the wall. I know that feeling. It hurts. But I promise you this. Your roots are still there, deep and alive. Don't wait for someone else to tell your story. Tell it yourself. Write it down. Share it. Keep it alive. Because if you don't, someone else might one day look at their family tree and not even know you were part of it. And wouldn't that be a shame? So I'll ask you, what would your family tree say about you? Thank you for spending this time with me and for listening to my story. If it touched you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us what really matters. And if you have a story of your own about love, family, or being remembered, tell me in the comments. Because no matter where we come from or what's been forgotten, our roots and our stories are what keep us standing strong. Lastly, remember to download this wonderful book called Healthy Boundaries After 60, How to Set Strong Boundaries, Saying No with Grace, Protecting Your Peace, and Strengthening Relationship with Your Children. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Now, if you like this story, go ahead and click on the next video appearing on your screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revolt like you've never seen before on Her Kindle Stories.